everybody, it's Dr. Daniel Leonard with Central Ohio Spine and Joint. I'm really excited to introduce our guest today. This is Eric Fruth with Columbus Running Company. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about your locations and a little bit about where we're at today.
So like I said, my name's Eric and I'm with Columbus Running Company. We have 4 locations here around the area. We're in Westerville, Dublin, Pickerington, and our newest location is in the Short North, downtown Columbus. And the concept with the stores is we're trying to fit people to the proper shoe for their foot, body, and workout type. And so rather than just sort of generically selecting something just based purely on color, we're really trying to make sure it's a little more thought out. We're taking care of you so that you can stay healthy and enjoy those workouts a little bit more.
Okay, great. All right, the reason I brought Eric in today is we've seen a good amount of running injuries over this summer thus far. And I work with these guys pretty closely with, if we have some athletes that are in the office, we do send them up here to get fit for the right shoe. And what we're going to talk today is a little bit about that. So deciding on what shoe is right for the right person, for the right foot is really, really essential. And what we do when we look at the body mechanics and we do an evaluation on someone, obviously everyone's anatomy is different, and so being able to match that up with the proper shoe can accomplish a couple different things. One is it can reduce the amount of injuries we see, and it can also make you a better runner. So what Eric's going to do is Eric's just going to take us through the difference between some of the shoes, and then what I want him to start off with is tell us a little bit more about the process that someone goes through when they come into the store to get fit for a shoe.
Well, to make sure that we are matching someone up to that right footwear piece, what we're going to do is first have someone slip their own shoes off, and we're going to take a look at you walk in your own bare feet. It's called a gait analysis, and what we're watching for is foot strike. Where's the initial impact coming down? As you're transitioning through, what's the level of pronation? Throwing out a lot of big words on some of that. Pronation is just your body absorbing shock. Foot hits the ground, it's going to have to absorb that shock in some direction. Overpronation, supination, things like that play into it. So we're just trying to get an idea of where you fit into that scale and which shoe is going to make sense on that end. If you've got an old pair of shoes that you've worn for workouts before, bring those in. We can look at the wear patterns on the bottom of the shoe, and that actually helps guide us as well. Not a necessity, but definitely a little boost for it. From there, we'll then have somebody go through and actually try the shoes on. Once you're sort of pigeonholed into the correct category, then we're going to start seeing, well, what feels a little bit better to you? And so at that point, depending on what your workout type is, we're going to let you hop on our treadmill, you can step outside, go for a walk, go for a run, really test them out and make sure that things are feeling great. Because the biggest key anymore, everything's synthetic. It has to feel great from day one because the break-in period is so minimal. And there is a very big difference when you look at a shoe like this. It's a little bit more sculpted. The color scheme is just one color through here. That's actually a visual clue that the shoe company gives you. Versus a shoe like this, it's a little bit straighter lasted. The color through here is dark gray. It's known as a post. This is a shoe designed for someone who overpronates and collapses inward. This is a shoe for someone who's fairly neutral, and for the most part their foot is just transitioning right down the center. So there's a little bit of a science behind that. We're just trying to make sure that we're matching you up correctly for that.
Okay, great. So guys, what I'd like you to do is, if you're interested in getting a shoe analysis, is stop by the clinic. We have some 10% off cards to come see these guys at either one of the locations. They'll do a great job getting you fit for the right shoe. Again, it's going to help you reduce some of the injuries, and it's going to also make you a better and faster runner. One other topic I want to chat about real fast is when to change shoes. So if you're an amateur runner up into a triathlete, talk to us a little bit about when we should be looking for new shoes.
So in general, the shoes are designed to last in terms of how many miles you could go out and walk in them. And that should fall somewhere between 300 and 500 miles if you take care of the shoes. Now, what happens is every step you take, if say you're walking, is your body weight coming down. If you transition into a run or a run-related sport, there's a moment where you're airborne, and so when you come down, depending on the surface you're on, it can be 3, 5, 6 times your body weight. Hitting concrete over and over again is obviously a lot of shock for the body to absorb. And so that is in turn going to break the shoes down a little bit quicker as well. So best thing to do is generally keep track of roughly what that mileage is. I'll have friends who will write the date that they bought the shoe on the heel with a Sharpie. I'll have others who use online training tools like logs to keep track of that mileage. But if you can generally get an idea of when you're falling into that 300 to 500 mile span, at that point start paying attention then to physical cues. When you start noticing achy shins and knees that weren't there before, it's a real good sign the shoe's starting to go flat. Gravity catches up with everything. It's going to catch up with your shoes just as much. And eventually that cushion that makes the shoe so springy and cushy from day one, it's just going to firm up. You're going to feel like you're just out there on the concrete without anything on. That's when it's time to replace that shoe. Now, to get the most life out of your shoe, there are a couple of little tips that'll help out. Number one is avoid the laundry. If your shoes get dirty, and hopefully they will because that means you're working out, you're going to want to preferably hand wash them. Put them through the sink. You can use sport detergent like Win or Sweat-X. It's going to go through, flush everything out without damaging the shoe. And then to dry it, what I like to do is fill the shoe up with crumpled up newspaper, leave that in for a couple of hours, pull that out, then I'll leave the shoe either by a vent or at the base of a fridge where it kicks out the air. It's going to dry the shoe gently. The biggest thing you want to avoid is never put your shoes through the dryer. One spin through the dryer is equivalent of somewhere between 300 and 400 miles. If your shoe's got a max of 500 miles on it, you can destroy a brand new pair of shoes right off the bat, putting it through there. And then the last little tip in terms of getting the most use out of it is you want your shoes, as much as possible, try and stay at room temperature when you're using them. I know your shoes are probably going to start to smell after you've been out there working out, but don't leave them out in a mud room if you're going outdoors for workouts in the winter. Shoe's going to firm up a lot in that cold. All that foam and rubber just doesn't react well to that extreme temperatures that Ohio hits through the winter time, and so you will lose that cushion for that day. Keep them inside. They're going to feel a lot better. You can enjoy those workouts a lot more.
Great. Okay, so for the average runner like myself, that we may have a hard time kind of keeping track of miles, so give me a time frame. Is it every 4 to 6 months? Is it once a year? So
Right.
give me just a general time frame if I'm an amateur runner.
Amateur runner, typically we see somewhere between 6 months and a year's use out of the shoe. The foams and rubbers will slowly degrade on their own, but most of that wear is going to come from just the step after step impact. And if somebody's getting out there and using it, that 6 month to a year window is pretty safe. As people start to step up, say someone wants to shoot for more of a half marathon or marathon type training program, obviously that's a lot more wear. Then we start to see things fall into more maybe every 3 months or so. But 6 months to a year is a pretty safe bet.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Eric. I really appreciate the time. I mean, again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or the guys over here at Columbus Running Company. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks for having us. In general, the shoes are going to be divided into two categories. You're going to have your neutral shoe and your stability shoe. Now, as we look at the two of them, there are some similarities, but they're more importantly defined by their differences. Starting with the similarities, both are going to be equally well cushioned in terms of just helping with shock absorption, that step after step impact that the body's dealing with. Where they're going to differ more, though, is the level of stability or support. When you look at a neutral shoe, a shoe like this is designed for someone whose foot type is fairly neutral. And by that I just mean, as the foot makes impact with the ground, it is in general transitioning more or less right down the center. A shoe like that is essentially a good shock absorber and not much more than that. This is a person who's fairly efficient on their own. This doesn't necessarily mean that there's no arch support within the shoe. Arch support is sort of independent of the real stability of a shoe. You still want to make sure you obviously have that, and so as we're trying the shoes on, I always tell people, we're looking for a puzzle piece. It needs to click in with your arch and feel like a natural fit. If it's a pinch or a pressure point, that's a bad sign. But in general, a neutral shoe is going to fit about 45% of the populace, and it's that person who's very efficient on their own. A stability shoe is going to fit about 55% of the populace, so a little bit more than half. This is the category that I'll fall into, so I've shared this one with you guys. But a lot of people, as their foot transitions through, their arch collapses inward, and that's known as overpronation. Overpronation is not necessarily a bad thing. Overpronation just means that the foot's absorbing shock, but that excess motion, that little bit of a twisting action, you know, you can take anywhere from 14, 15, 1600 steps per mile. That slight twisting action repeated that many times, step after step after step, mile after mile after mile, that adds up. And so a stability shoe will have a feature built into it to serve as a guardrail. Typically it's called a post, and it's a wedge of denser foam and rubber than the rest of the shoe. But the concept is, as that foot transitions forward and that arch is really collapsing inward a great deal or overpronating, that post, that guardrail, is going to arrest this motion and instead guide the foot into the more neutral position, the hope being to turn this foot somewhat more into that neutral foot type. helping guide that, make things more efficient, and cut down on that stress on the body.
Hey guys, this is Dr. Daniel Leonard with Central Ohio Spine and Joint again. Okay, so I've got Eric back from the Columbus Running Company. So we're going to talk about one more concept, and that is you've probably seen a lot of hype lately, a lot of runners out in either barefoot style running or what we call minimalist style running. So I just want Eric to talk a little bit about the minimalist type shoe and a little bit of his thoughts on it. So go ahead.
With minimalism, what we're talking about is a shoe essentially lower to the ground, less of a drop from the heel down to the forefoot, and just much more lightweight, flexible, and natural feeling. Minimal. The concept there being trying to get closer to that natural feel is going to be a little bit more efficient for the body. Now, that can be true, but it depends on the person. Human body is not necessarily the most efficient machine. I mean, if I take my glasses off, I can't see anything. So the way that we look at the more structured, traditional running shoe is it's similar to having that pair of glasses. It takes what your body can do and just amplifies it, makes it more efficient. But for the person who is relatively efficient on their own, relatively lower rate of injuries, things along those lines, typically speaking, this person can kind of start getting away with a little bit less, and that's where minimalism most comes into play. It was a bigger phenomenon a few years ago. A lot of people were getting into experimenting with it. It's really receded a lot recently as we've just found more and more people just aren't efficient enough. It did lead to a little bit of an uptick in injuries for just the general populace. But for those who want to experiment and see if things can feel a little bit more just natural, these shoes come in a couple of different varieties. At the most basic, you're looking at a shoe similar to this. Again, thin-soled, lightweight, extremely flexible, but we'll see varieties on that. The most popular anymore isn't true minimalism, but it's built like a minimal shoe. And so a shoe like this is still very lightweight, still has the flexibility, but the makers of it have looked at the world and said, you know what, it might be more natural to run in that barefoot style, but it's a concrete world out there. It's a very dense, hard surface we're running on. So let's keep the shoe flat in terms of the heel and forefoot are on a fairly level plane, helps you run more towards the ball of your foot, gives you all those benefits of that more efficient motion, but taking advantage of the materials that they can use to give you that extra cushion, they've thickened out the entire sole, so they've raised everything up to give you that extra cushion. Still extremely lightweight, to the extreme that even brands like this have started to come into play. They're built just like the barefoot shoes, but extremely thick and plush. Shoes along these lines have become sort of the go-to for the ultramarathon crowd. People out there doing those crazier 50, 100-mile, just long races, because it allows them to run with that natural, sort of efficient form of a barefoot sort of stride, but it's given them maximum cushion to protect their legs during those long hauls, mega impact. And then on the other end, most of minimalism has turned more into sort of form-based shoes. So rather than just focusing on being lower to the ground and flexible, they're starting to add features to really try to move someone away from that hard heel strike that's a little bit less efficient and move them maybe more towards a midfoot strike where there's a little less stress on knees, shins, and everything else, and instead turns the foot into a lever to spring them forward. And so you get brands like this that are adding these forefoot lugs that you land on, and they kind of give you a little bit of an extra spring, almost like a trampoline, pushing you along. So the general sort of cohesive thing that we're looking at here is all of them are thinner, lighter. Where they can differ is how they view cushion and its importance. You can still go for that really, really firm, responsive feel, a little bit faster feeling, hits the ground, it's like a bouncy ball springing you along. Or you can go with that same lightweight and flexible feel, but just add a bit more cushion to it, just depending on what you feel most comfortable with.
Great. Okay, so one thing that we do in the office is when we have a runner that's either suffered an injury or they're interested in increasing their performance, typically these shoes come up, and in my opinion, and maybe this differs from you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but it is a process for most people. Mm-hmm. There's few athletes that are at the point to where they can get right into this shoe right away, and they have the muscle endurance, they have the stability within the foot to be able to handle it. Typically, it's a little bit of a process where they're starting out in a little bit more of a neutral shoe, and then over time, as they increase their miles, maybe then we can progress them into a little bit more of a minimalist type shoe. So that's usually my recommendation, is to progress it over time, get them used to the force that's transmitting through the foot, differentiating between this and the minimalist shoe.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where minimalism is at its best, is when someone's using it as a tool. Where we see the uptick in injuries is, it's America. We want to go for it all out, all overnight.
Yeah.
And so we'll see someone try to go from their standard running shoe to this starting tomorrow and doing everything in this. And that's just the same as going into the weight room and suddenly you're trying to do max bench press when you haven't lifted a weight in years. You've got to gradually progress into any new workout routine, and this qualifies as a new workout routine because it is going to change the stress on the body. But taken gradually, it does help somebody quite a bit when it comes to working on running form, making them more efficient, just making them a better runner.
Awesome. Great. Okay, again, guys, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to myself or the guys over here at CRC. What's your website?
ColumbusRunning.com.
And you have a couple of different running groups around town, correct?
We do.
How would we get involved in that?
ColumbusRunning.com. If you go on there, there's a section across the top. It says Running Clubs. Click on that. We do group runs throughout the week around town, all paces, all abilities, and it's free and open to absolutely anyone and everyone. But definitely a good time.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.